Hi everybody, this is Snowy. Welcome back to Multifamily Playbook again. This episode, we are going to talk about how to raise rent without losing residents. If you are a business owner or landlord of the rental property, even just homeowner, we know that every year, everything increased. Like payroll, like material, what we need to pay to the general contractors, and also our insurance, property tax increase every year. If we don't raise our rent, we are unable to afford all the increases. But as a landlord or a property manager, we also need to consider about if our residents are able to afford the increase, because we don't want to lose the resident. That would increase our turnover cost. Well, during our rent increase, we have to do a lot of market survey. And of course, we need to consider about all the costs increased in the past year or the future. For example, insurance, property tax, and then all the other material, labor cost, payrolls. Usually, all this data with some emphasis, because being a good landlord means fair to our residents and to our bottom line. So most of the time, we have to explain to our residents why rent increases happen. Like I just mentioned, the insurance, property tax increase every year, depending where your properties are. Some of the states, the insurance increased more than other states, and also the property tax. For example, in Texas, the property tax increased a lot most of the years. And in the last few years, the insurance increased like crazy in 2024. It got a little bit better in 2025, but depending on the conditions of your property and also the vintage of your property as well. Material, labor cost, and of course your vendor's cost would be increased as well. As everybody knows that the tariff increased the cost of our material a lot this year and the past few years as well after the COVID. So we have to spend more every year on our operation expenses. And most of the time, we also need to spend some capex, either maintain the property or upgrade the property, even add amenities to the property to make better living conditions to our residents. So it's not about squeezing any cents from our residents. It's about keeping the property healthy so every resident benefits. We always share the reason behind the increase to our residents most of the time. Sometimes the residents understand, but some of them don't understand. Well, most of our properties in the last few years, most of the rent increase would be 3 to 5%, depending on the location of the properties. But from last year and this year, some of the locations or some of the states that we need to keep the rent flat, or some of the locations that we can see a little bit decrease on the rent. That's good for the residents, but not so good for the landlord, because we don't see any decrease on the labor, material, property tax, nor insurance. So sometimes some of the residents couldn't afford it. We always would like to know more why they refuse to renew their lease. And sometimes we might do some adjustment just to keep our residents. In the nowadays market, we don't always see an increase, or sometimes we just let them have 6 months or month-to-month lease, just be more flexible with them. Some of the residents would also submit a notice to vacate if they saw an increase on their rent, and they would go somewhere else to look for a new place and then figure out that our rent is still more reasonable than the other competitors. They will come back and renew the lease. So most of the time, depending on the properties and the locations of our rental properties, we would consider about just maximum 5% increase instead of a lot of increase. That would scare a lot of residents and cause a lot of move-outs. Retention is more valuable than turnover costs. Some of our properties, we use the AI to generate new or renewal leases, but some of our smaller properties, we are still using manual market survey. We will send our team to get general market survey to see what percentage or if there's any room for us to increase the rent or if we have to keep the rent flat. And while communicating with our residents, usually we want to make sure that our team clearly explain the reasons why the rent got increased. And most of our properties, we give at least 60 days notice on the increase of their renewal lease, or some of our properties we have 90 days, just to give our residents enough time to consider, or if they have to shop around and they have enough time to make a decision. And make sure that our residents understand the trend of the market and the increase of all the operation costs. And always remember to give your resident a certain time notice about the rent increase. And most of the time we also do something small, like change the light fixture or change the toilet, give our resident a small gift for renewing their lease. And sometimes, depending on the market, we can also offer a 13 months to 15 months lease to make sure they lock their rent for a longer time, so they don't have to worry about the increase in the next, so they don't need to worry about the increase of the rent after 12 months later. Like I mentioned in all my other episodes, that we like to use TAA or NAA lease forms because there are rent or rent adjustments clause building in TAA or NAA lease forms, and there are clear timeline for notification, and there are also renewal addenda templates available from TAA or NAA leases, and also legal support for non-renewal support if we need any. Well, when we raise the rent, we always try to keep as many residents as possible. It doesn't mean that we want to lose the residents. So let's do it fairly, explain it clearly, and always value our relationship with our residents, because residents are worth keeping, and moving out means higher turnover costs. And that's something that we don't want to see, especially in today's market.